Hi, I'm Kenzie. Welcome back to my podcast. If you're just joining, welcome. Today we will be talking about my 6th Blue's Clues VHS, ABCs and 1, 2, 3s. This VHS includes pre-reading and math. First, let's talk about pre-reading. This episode starts out with Steve, of course, reading a book literally titled A Really Great Book. It turns out he and Blue were having reading time. So when he goes to see what Blue is up to, the viewer reads Steve's name on the back of his shirt. Pretty cool if you ask me. Then Steve suggested that we should read together. So he picks up Blue's book and we begin to read. Steve was a pretty good reader. So were Blue and the viewer. After reading Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, Steve asked if Blue would like to read a really great book. Blue said no. The question was, what book does Blue want to read? That's when Blue wanted to play Blue's Clues. But first Steve had to get rid of the pauperette. He asked the viewer what letter pauperette begins with. P, of course. So he writes the letter P on the pauperette, and just like that, the pauperette popped right off the screen. Then he realized that pop starts with P just like pauperette. He thought that was cool. He then goes to side table drawer to get his handy dandy notebook. But beforehand, side table drawer reads the back of Steve's shirt. Then Steve noticed that notebook starts with N. And so the game Blue's Clues has begun. Steve was so interested in reading a really great book though, until the viewer spotted the first clue, which is a moon. After finding the first clue, Mrs. Pepper is heard in the background. She asks if Steve needed any groceries. He said sure. Then Mr. Salt and Paprika enter the scene and says that they need help with the grocery list. We would be happy to help them. Our job was to find the groceries written on the list by reading. We got the milk, the bread, and the juice. Just what Paprika wanted the whole grocery trip. And let me tell you, Paprika was very happy to get her juice. She was hungry for it. After saying goodbye, Steve noticed the book starts with B, door starts with D, and curtain starts with C. He then noticed that cow also starts with C. He then goes on and lists all kinds of words that start with C until the viewer spotted the second clue, which is a cow, which also starts with C. Steve was ecstatic to learn that. After drawing the second clue, it's mail time. Blue had words from the Mail Time song, and the viewer got to have the opportunity to read and sing along. The mailbox enters the scene and gives Steve lots of letters of the alphabet. He's so funny, isn't he? Then the real letter opens and we see our friends at the library reading a book called If You Give a Mouse a Cookie. Now that is a classic book. All books are classic, don't you think? Anyway, after saying goodbye, Steve resumes in reading a really great book until the viewer finds Blue skidooing into a book about a girl and a puppy. Steve does too. When we enter the storybook, Steve and Blue take their respective seats with their names on them and we begin reading a sentence. The problem was the sentence did not make any sense. Our job was to fix it so it makes sense. After fixing 3 sentences, Steve read the whole story and it went like this. A girl threw the ball. A puppy caught the ball. The girl and the puppy ate a snack. The end. Pretty good story. As Steve was wondering what they had for a snack, the viewer spotted the third clue, which is the word jump. That's when Steve realized we had all 3 clues and it was time to sit in the thinking chair. It was time to think. We were trying to figure out what book Blue wants to read, and our clues were a moon, a cow, and the word jump. At first, Steve asked who jumps and thought that the moon jumps. That was wrong. Then Steve thought that the cow could jump next to the moon or over the moon. Then the viewer guessed correctly that Blue wanted to read Hey Diddle Diddle. At that point, Steve realized we just figured out Blue's clues. After the celebratory song, Steve and Blue went to get the book Hey Diddle Diddle. Then Mr. Salt, Mrs. Pepper, and Paprika come back to remind us that we helped them with the grocery list. Even the word jump comes back. Then Steve proceeded to read the book. After reading this said book, Steve had one more thing for us to read, and that was the lyrics to the So Long song. All we had to do was follow the bouncing ball. And that's how the episode ends. Now let's talk about the episode as a whole. I feel like kids can learn a lot if they want to learn about reading. This episode taught me that reading is lots of fun. Of course, I mostly read kids' books, because they remind me of when I was a kid once. All in all, it's a good episode. Now let's talk about math. Don't worry, it's not going to be boring. So this episode starts out with Steve counting Steve's steps it took to get to the front door. 5. Then Steve walked 5 steps back to Blue. The same number of Steve's steps. And Steve told the viewer that he and Blue were making a list of things they needed to buy at the store. Steve definitely needed a new crayon to write and draw with. Blue wanted to buy something too. The question was, what does Blue want to buy? That's when Blue wanted to play Blue's Clues. But first Steve had to get rid of the pauperette. He gets rid of it by counting its toes and tickling it, but he apologizes for tickling, so that's good. Then he goes to side table drawer to get his handy dandy notebook. It took him 6 Steve steps to get to her. And so the game Blue's Clues has begun. Steve goes to the kitchen to count 10 ice cubes in the ice cube tray until the viewer spotted the first clue on the ice cubes. After drawing the first clue, Steve hears Mr. Salt and Mrs. Pepper in the background. They were wondering who had more apples. We decided to help them by counting the apples. Mr. Salt had 3 and Mrs. Pepper had 5. It turned out that Mrs. Pepper had more apples because 5 is more than 3. Mr. Salt thought it was not fair and that they should bring the same number of apples to take to the picnic. So Steve gave Mr. Salt 1 apple from Mrs. Pepper and they each had 4 apples. They were equal. Finally, Mr. Salt and Mrs. Pepper wanted to know how many apples did they have all together. We counted 8 because 4 plus 4 equals 8. Mighty fine figuring if you ask me. Afterwards, Steve counted the steps to the garden. 12. There we see Shovel and Pail arguing who had more graham crackers. Steve, Blue, and the viewer wanted to help by counting the graham crackers. Shovel had 8 and Pail had 7. It turned out that Shovel had more graham crackers because 8 is more than 7. Then they wanted to figure out how many graham crackers they had all together to take to the picnic. Counted 15 because 7 plus 8 equals 15. More mighty fine figuring if you ask me. After saying goodbye to Shovel and Pail, the viewer spotted the second clue, which is a cup. After drawing the second clue, it's mail time. Mailbox was counting up to 27. 27 of what? 27 stamps in his book. Quite a collection if you ask me. Anyway, the letter showed our friends having pizza. There were 4 people, so they needed 4 pieces. The girl cut the pizza in half, but it wasn't enough. Then she cut it in quarters, which was enough for everybody. After saying goodbye, Steve thought cutting the pizza into 4 quarters was smart. That meant they were using fractions. Steve thought that was cool. Then we hear Blue in the background. She scoos into the present store. Steve did too, so he could find what he needed to buy there. There was so much stuff, but the thing Steve was looking for was a new crayon. Now, before Steve could buy anything, he needed to check how much money he had in his wallet. He had 7 blue dollars. Yes, blue dollars. You know, dollar bills with blue on them. Anyway, Steve wanted to know how much the new crayon cost. 2 blue dollars. How did the viewer know? We looked at the prices underneath the items. So, Steve wondered if he had enough blue dollars to buy the crayon. He did. So he paid at the cash register, and his new crayon was wrapped up like a present. Then Steve wondered if he had enough money to buy something else. He had 5 left because 7 minus 2 equals 5. He thought he could buy the green socks, but they were 6 blue dollars, and he only had 5. Then he noticed the cool hat. He had enough because the hat was 3 blue dollars, and he had 5. Again, he paid at the cash register, and his new hat was wrapped up like a present. After that, he had only 2 blue dollars left. Let me tell you, Steve loves the present store. As Steve celebrates, the viewer spotted the third clue, which is lemons. That's when Steve realized we had all 3 clues and it was time to sit in the thinking chair. It was time to think. We were trying to figure out what Blue wants to buy, and our clues were ice cubes, a cup, and lemons. At first, Steve thought Blue wanted to buy lemons that wear a cup as a hat and just slip around on the ice cubes. That was wrong. Then Steve thought what is made from lemons and ice and you could pour into a cup. The viewer guessed correctly that Blue wants to buy lemonade. And Blue just loves lemonade. At that point, Steve realized we just figured out Blue's clues. After the celebratory song, Steve and Blue go outside to buy lemonade at the picnic. That's when we saw Shovel and Pail, Mr. Salt and Mrs. Pepper, and the cash register. The lemonade was only 1 blue dollar. Steve paid and had only 1 blue dollar left for his savings. So as Blue happily drank her fresh squeezed lemonade, it was time to say so long, but sing just one more song. Now let's talk about the episode as a whole. I feel like kids can learn a lot if they want to learn about math. I love math because it involves numbers and problem solving. All in all, it's a good episode. So yeah, that's ABCs and 1, 2, 3s. If you would like to play again, just go back to the beginning of this episode. And remember, you can do anything that you want to do. Bye!